Let's talk about it. I can even think for myself, like, is it comfortable to share, in my relationship? Like, I've noticed I've been feeling, like I'm in a rut in this relationship, or I found that I've felt an attraction towards a coworker, for example. Like, let's talk about it.
Welcome to Emotional and Mental Justice. I'm Yuna, and welcome to my podcast. My podcast is a place of familiarity. It is a place where we can learn to rediscover our hearts and our minds with an aim to live a life that we will love, where we can be free to be exactly who we are and with no apologies. Come and take a walk with me. Let us get that justice that we deserve.
Have you cheated on a partner? Have you been cheated on? Or are you thinking about cheating? Infidelity is very real, and infidelity recovery is very necessary. Today's topic is on infidelity recovery. I am joined by Janet. She's a licensed therapist all the way from California, whose focus is in relationships and trauma. She is passionate about supporting women with a history of sexual abuse and infidelity recovery. Let's uncover
Hey,
this.
Janet. So thank you for joining me today. I'm so glad that you're here. We finally managed to get here because we've been trying to arrange this for a while, haven't we?
yeah, excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Good, good. So can you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, so I'm Janet. I'm a licensed therapist. I work in Los Angeles, California. Uh, Previously, I was living in Florida, so I'm licensed in both of those states. And predominantly, my practice consists of working with women. I work with a lot of trauma survivors. It's a privilege for me to work with a lot of survivors of trauma and through their healing process. I also enjoy working with individuals wanting to improve their relationships or having relationship challenges, in the dating space or in their marriages. Also, if there's been some sort of a betrayal or infidelity, I enjoy supporting clients navigating through that process. So that's a little bit about me.
Okay, great. So what is it that's drawn you to relationships and trauma?
Well, I have my own story when it comes to that. And I think a lot of therapists that join the field or, go to school for this have their own stories. So, it was in my own recovery process that really drew me to this work. And in my own healing, truly. And I'm still working on it. I'm still healing. I'm still going to therapy. I'm still working through my stuff. And I just love it because I feel like there's so much raw humanity that comes into these sessions with a lot of people that are wanting to work through this. So, again, I feel like it's a privilege. And I've also very much appreciated the clinicians I've personally worked with because they've helped me so much get to the place where I'm at now as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you say therapists tend to in the field tend to come from a place of understanding because they've been through something, that's so true, because I can say that for myself. Obviously, I'm a qualified therapist as well. And I feel like if you haven't been through something, or let me say, if you have been through something, it's easier for you to come from a place of empathy and just understanding and truly being able to say, okay, I can see where this person is coming from.
Absolutely, because that's also part of the healing. I mean, so many people seek therapy because they didn't get that empathy or understanding in their families, or their families just didn't know how to help them. And so, in therapy, it's hopefully a safe space to explore, feelings and needs and emotions and boundaries and all of that.
Yeah, I love about what you said as well. I love that you said you're still going through your stuff and you're still working through it and you're still seeking therapy, because a lot of the times people think that therapists are done and they're dealt with, and that's it. They're now here to just help us, but we go through our own things. We're human, and life's ups and downs still continue regardless of your profession.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I'm ever going to be done. I feel like I've sort of accepted the fact that I'm going to have therapy in my life, going forward in some capacity, and I agree, every time I self-disclose to a client, like, yeah, I'm in therapy too, like their wide eyes open wide.
Yeah, I get that.
Really, really, you are? And yes, we don't know everything, we have our
No.
stuff to work through too.
Yeah, yeah, and I feel like if you do get to a place where you feel like you're done, I think that's a false sense of security, because life throws curveballs and the ups and downs continue.
For sure. For sure.
Yeah. Okay, so I wanted to ask a few things just around infidelity. So what is infidelity?
So infidelity is any sort of betrayal, boundary violation in a committed partnership. Typically, I've seen in a monogamous partnership, but it doesn't necessarily have to be in just a monogamous partnership. It's essentially going out of the boundaries that are within any type of partnership that's out there.
Yeah. So speaking of boundaries, do you feel like there are levels to infidelity, or do you feel like, because some people would say, because I've had this conversation with a few people, they would say infidelity is the cheating, it's the sex. And others would say, well, texting, that's emotional infidelity. What do you feel about the levels of infidelity?
You know, the lines I think are gray a lot of times right now, because yeah, in the past, 10 years, 20 years ago, it probably was just defined as like stepping out, having sex with somebody else outside of the partnership. But that's not always the case anymore. I mean, how do you define it, right? Like, I think that's part of the work in therapy is defining what felt like a betrayal to you. So if it was, for example, your partner, maybe they didn't go see someone, but they like opened a dating app and like started a profile or started looking around on a dating app, that can feel like a betrayal, or some women in particular, at least in my practice, I've seen feel like if their partners turn to pornography on the internet, that can feel like a betrayal. So the lines are gray. It's not black and white anymore. And I often tell people a betrayal is just really anything that you felt like was overstepping a boundary for you in
Yeah.
your relationship.
Yeah, and it's so important that what you've said is that it's an individual thing, because where somebody might feel like their partner opening a dating app is cheating, another person would say, oh, they only opened it, they didn't do anything. They
Right.
got curious, it's human nature. So it is definitely an individual thing.
Right.
So because obviously you do the work with it, but can a relationship truly recover from infidelity? Because I mean, it opens up a massive can of worms with trust issues.
Yes, it's hard work, but I'm a firm believer, and I've seen it in practice that and I mainly work with monogamous couples,
Mhm.
that if the two individuals want it to work and want to create a whole new relationship, it can be done. It's a process. It doesn't happen overnight, and it requires consistency in the process. I think, Esther Perel, who's big on education on affairs and infidelity and different types of relationship, talks about the fact that when you do this type of work, you are working to close out the relationship that you've had before, and you're working on creating something new, something more honest than what it was before.
Yeah, and like you say, I think that's a very difficult thing for somebody to do. I'll speak from not only my own experiences, but from seeing other people's experiences, whether it's friends, whether it's in therapy with me counseling people. And what I've seen a lot of the time is the power dynamic shift. In terms of the person that's been cheated on, for example, will now try and gain this power or superiority, and you know, it now becomes, oh, you've got to do this for me because you did this to me and I have the power to do this now. Tit for tat, I'll get my own back. Yet in the midst of that, they're trying to forgive and trying to gain trust back. And have you come across that?
Yeah, it's complicated because so many things come up for the betrayed partner, and think about it, like if particularly if they are in marriage, or if the relationship has been going on for a long time,
Mhm.
their whole reality of what they thought their lives look like has been just completely shattered.
Shattered, yeah.
And yeah, and so a lot comes up, a lot of anger comes up,
Mhm.
for these people, a lot of sadness, sometimes even feelings of revenge, like you talked about, like I'm going to get my power back and, do something to you to make you feel pain. Um, Forgiveness, that happens if it happens a little bit later, but we certainly see a desire to come out of that angry space. Um, and yeah, I've also seen for betrayed partners, like they unfortunately turn inward and blame themselves, right? Like, how could I have not seen this happen? Or
Yeah.
how could I not have known? Is there something wrong with me? Am I not, witty enough, smart enough, beautiful enough? Am I not a great lover? Like all of these questions.
Yeah, the sense of self-worth dips, doesn't it? It just becomes, you start to feel unworthy.
Unworthy and just confusion, like questioning, like, is this what I thought it was? Am I who I thought I was? Right? Like a lot of that shows up for people.
Yeah, yeah. And you talked about sort of like forgiveness coming in later on with let's say, for example, bereavement. When I've done bereavement counseling, there's stages of grief.
Hmm.
Would you say there are stages in infidelity recovery?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, typically when I see couples come in for this type of work, there's been some sort of a discovery of this infidelity was happening. So certainly the first stage is just crisis management because the
Mm,
couple is in crisis and that's why they're calling. So a lot of the initial stages are just helping the couple stabilize, and I like understand how to at least work with all of the emotions that are coming up and communicating about the emotions, creating a sense of safety. So, in the
mm,
initial stages of this work with the crisis management, we talk about what are the boundaries going to look like now so the betrayed partner can at least feel somewhat safe in this relationship. And then, later on, a lot of it is processing the emotions. Why did this happen?
mm,
What was going on? What were the internal kind of existential questions, existential crises that were
yeah.
happening within each individual? And then of course later on too, it's like identifying, do we even want to try to move forward in this relationship, or are we just going to move on separately or just be co-parents? So it's a lot of exploration there.
Yeah, yeah. So we've talked a lot about the partner that's been cheated on. What about the person that's perhaps done the cheating? Um, from your
Yeah.
experience, what have you found? What have you found there? Is there a common sort of pattern of behavior or?
It's I've seen a couple different things. So I've seen, for women in particular, if women have stepped out of their relationship, oftentimes for women it starts out as like an emotional friendship.
Mm,
So women typically don't necessarily seek out sex, right? They seek out, emotional connection because women put
yeah.
themselves out emotionally a little bit more than men do.
Mm-hmm.
uh, so it typically starts that way for women, and then then it kind of tends to progress, and affairs start to happen if the other person initiates a sexual relationship. um, for men though, typically we see men actually seeking sex, but then when the emotional connection starts to happen, then it's like, oh crap, what's going on here?
Yeah, yeah,
Then men have that freak out. I've also seen where the stepping out happens. Sometimes people will say it's kind of like accidental. It just sort of happened. I've seen that before too. For some people, it is, truly a one night stand. And then for others, it's really, they just felt like bored in their lives or lacking excitement or just feeling kind of stuck and in a rut, and then just seeking, almost this like adrenaline rush, or almost like if you were looking at the brain, like a dopamine rush,
yeah.
happen to reignite some sort of excitement and to explore who they are again. They're feeling like they're not being true to themselves. So they seek out these other relationships because they're
Mm.
not being honest with themselves and honest in their partnerships.
Yeah, and I guess that's where therapy is truly powerful for these relationships, because if you're in a place where you're quite lost, you're not sure what's happening or where you want to go, what if you're getting what you're seeking from your partner, and if you don't have that guidance from a therapist, it can be quite difficult to actually find either the tools to deal with what's been happening. And there's a lot of stigma obviously around therapy. Sometimes it's like it's just talking to somebody, but it's not just talking to somebody, is it? I mean, therapists have the tools to be able to do the work.
Of course, yeah. I mean, we definitely analyze what's going on. We
Mm.
try to find and look for any sort of negative patterns. So yeah, it is beyond just like listening and asking questions. And what I'll say, when I've seen people sort of step out as well, it's um they kind of fear, being honest with their partners, right? Like, because I can even think for myself, like, is it comfortable to share, in my relationship? Like, I've noticed I've been feeling, like I'm in a rut in this relationship, or I found that I've felt an attraction towards a coworker, for example. Like, these are very vulnerable things to share. And so if the couple doesn't necessarily have that foundation to be honest,
Mm-hmm.
these things unfortunately tend to happen. Now, it's not to say that it's a good reason or an excuse, no,
Yeah.
but we do want to try to understand, like, before this happened, why couldn't have there been that communication?
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's quite a difficult thing to begin with, to have that foundation. I mean, honesty and openness, yes, that could be an easy thing for people, but something like saying I felt an attraction towards a coworker. Um, a lot of relationships start from a point of insecurities because people have had a past where they've either been hurt, they're trying to build trust, and their partners might know this, or they might also be going through that. So both parties might be going through it, and to then be able to say, "Oh, I'm attracted to someone else," could just explode the entire relationship.
Right. Yeah, and again, I'm gonna kind of cite the work of Esther Perel. She talks, and I love her work because it's just so realistic and very straightforward. But
Hmm.
she talks about how one person can't be our every single thing, right? Like, friend, lover, safe person to talk to, person that can identify with all of my hobbies and interests, the best co-parent. You know what I mean? Like, it's quite impossible for that person to check every single box. And
And that's when people are looking for perfection and just can't find what they're looking for because they want every single box ticked.
right, exactly. And and that's why we have to normalize being able to have these conversations around, I am feeling like our sexual relationship has kind of been in a rut. Like, what can we do? Or I have noticed myself feeling an emotional or physical attraction towards this person recently. I want to talk about it. Like, the part of the work is understanding, like, we can be having these conversations because it is so normal to find ourselves in a rut at times, or not feeling attracted to or attracted to somebody else at times. Like, these conversations have to be okay because our partner can't always check every single box every single day of the rest of our
Yeah,
relationship.
yeah.
It's not realistic.
Yeah, and I found that when people have got to a place of being able to have that open communication, because people talk about open communication all the time, but some people on a surface level of, oh, I'm able to tell them how I am today, or that I'm a bit sad. But when you go so much deeper, from my experience, I've learned that a lot of people refuse to go back to a relationship where the communication is not that deep. And that just shows the power of communication.
Yeah, it is so powerful because, you open yourself up to where you're truly at and how you're feeling. And so often, at least in the work that I've seen, when couples are coming in, part of the reason why they're coming in too is because they just don't know how to communicate about all of these challenging feelings, even just aside from the affair. How can we talk about these things? It's like they were almost living as roommates, or like pseudo acquaintances or pseudo
Yeah,
friends, and not having these emotional conversations.
yeah, yeah. Like what I hear a lot is when people break up or something happens, I just need time, or
Hmm.
we're separated, or we're taking a break. Do you feel like
Hmm.
do you think separation is a necessity following infidelity? Not necessarily long-term separation, but some time apart.
Well, that's unique for every person. Some people that have come in have said that they've needed that, and we can grant that. However, there have to be limitations, right? So, like, if you guys have kids, you're still going to have to maintain communication for the kids. If the separation is to just like distance, but then you're not doing any sort of internal work, then I just don't see any point in a separation. Then just separate for good, right? Um, so there has to be, you know, a reason for that,
Yeah.
and that's part of like the stabilization phase of this type of work. Like we decide what are going to be some of the boundaries, because some people say like, I just can't sleep in the same room as you, so I need to be in a different room, or I need to be in a different home during this period. And
Yeah.
that's okay. You know, we can sort of establish that. It's just, you have to still be doing the work. You have to be doing the infidelity recovery therapy. You have to also do your own individual therapy, ideally at the same time if possible. And so that's something that I will certainly work with clients that are necessarily wanting that.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say, as you were talking, the word that was coming up for me was boundaries, but you said it at the end. It's so important when you're able to set those boundaries. And, you know, like when you say somebody wants to sleep in a separate room, somebody doesn't even want to kiss you anymore, or
Mhm.
touch you, or see your face, or even watch TV with you. So setting those
Yeah.
boundaries, and I guess time limits, and working towards something um, is really important. And also another thing you said is very interesting, that when people are having infidelity recovery therapy, so supposedly they may be having it as a couple, but to be able to have your own individual therapy, because it could get quite intense to do everything together, and the emotions that fly out of that, and not be able to have your own safe space.
Sure. Yeah. You know, again, ideally it would happen at the same time. And I understand not everybody can do that. It's a big time commitment, it's a big financial commitment.
Yeah.
But it's important because, particularly for the betrayed partner, you know, this is what I often hear, you know, why do I need to go to individual therapy? They're the ones that did what they did. You know, they need to be working on themselves. And I'll often say, like, you're right. They do need to work on themselves. They do need to understand why this happened. But I'll also tell the betrayed partner, like, but you're also experiencing pain. You're also not in a great space internally, understandably so. You don't have to go through this alone. And also for the betrayed partner too, they often don't know initially if they want to continue the relationship or not. Some people need time and space to really figure that out. And some people are not in a place initially of forgiveness just yet. So having that individual space to process through all of these things is so valuable and so needed.
Yeah, yeah, very true. And that takes me like into the next thing I was going to talk about is forgiveness. It's such a difficult thing. I mean,
Yeah.
I think it's a difficult thing, because so much trust has been broken. And like you say, not everybody's there at a place of forgiveness. Um, but even forgiving yourself for doing what you've done, to somebody that you
Mhm.
possibly love as much as you do. Um,
Yeah.
so I guess on both parts, yeah, forgiveness. So from your experience, I don't know, what have you found about forgiveness? Is that one of the biggest things?
Yeah, because, you know, for particularly again for the betrayed partner, I typically work with the betrayed partners too. It's that they're holding on to so much anger and rage because their reality was just altered and shattered, you
Hmm.
know, and it's really hard to forgive that. It's so challenging, particularly too if there's been like a history of other traumas, you know, other challenges in life. You know, it makes it that much harder because it's kind of another reinforcement of that. But what I found is, and this is again very cliche, I'm sure we've all heard this before,
Mm,
it's that you're not doing it necessarily for the other person. You're doing it for yourself so that you don't have to carry the rage and the anger and the shame anymore. And I'll even tell the betrayed partner, your spouse likely isn't even worthy of this because of everything that they did. They are
mhm.
likely not even worthy of the forgiveness. It's that you are doing this, you are making essentially a conscious decision to not carry the anger anymore towards this
Yeah,
person, if that's what
yeah.
you choose to.
And
And
yeah,
go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, forgiveness for yourself is the most important thing for sure. I agree with that. I have to definitely agree with that, because when you forgive, you take away so much of the pain, so much of the hurt, and you're able to move on. But I have a thing. Sorry, you were gonna continue talking, so I'll come back to what I was going to say and let you finish if you're not done.
Yeah, and I was just gonna say too, for the partner, let's say that had the affair, the forgiveness is a lot like you were talking about in the self-forgiveness, self-compassion, because carrying shame is also not healthy. I mean, if truly there's been remorse and apologizing and wanting to do better, wanting to understand themselves more, a lot of it is just having self-compassion and doing a lot of the self-compassion work in order to not essentially like carry the internalized shame.
Mm,
and
mm.
and that's a lot of the self-forgiveness there. And so I see it to be very profound, and also a process as well.
Yeah, yeah. And the internalized shame is a place where a lot of people seem to think that it's outer shame as well. Like everybody sees them in such a way, and everybody feels like, how could your marriage break down? And it depends on the cultural issues as well, or whatever else. But you find a lot of the time the shame you feel within, nobody else sees that. It's just what you're feeling. So I guess the work is also about dealing with the outside, the shame that you believe is outside as well as on the inside. Um,
Yeah, and shame is so pervasive. I mean, in any kind of issues that we're struggling with that has shame, shame unfortunately grows in secrecy. And so shame can die, shame can hopefully go away or evolve into something else when we do talk about it, when we do acknowledge it, when we do, work through the emotions that are happening with the shame. So I always, of course, encourage like do that work because it is not healthy. And if we still carry shame, we might actually repeat certain patterns if we don't work on it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So what I was going to say earlier, I was going to say we're talking about forgiveness. I wrote this down just as you were talking, so I didn't forget. There's a fine line between forgiveness and just moving forward. Because I did a talk on forgiveness a little while back, and I feel like people look at forgiving a lot of the time like you've got to forgive and forget. Those two words tend to come together a lot. Forget about what happened, and at the minute you forgive, the pain is gone. But actually, I feel like you can move on without necessarily forgiving the other person. But again, there's a fine line. I don't know. What do you think about that?
I think how you described it is perfect and beautiful because even in like this is essentially what I'm working on in my own therapy right now.
Yeah.
But it's like you're right, like I haven't forgiven the person.
Mm,
Um, but what I'm trying to work on is but I at the same time don't want to carry anger anymore towards
yeah.
this person. And that's my process. If someone can like truly forgive the person, like that's beautiful and that's great. It's just we don't want to feel like we have to do it because that's what society tells us to do, or that's maybe what our religion or scripture tells us to do. If you are not there, please do not force yourself to be there because then it won't be authentic and real. For me, at least, the best definition that I could have at least defined for myself is if the person is not worthy of forgiveness,
Mhm.
that can be true for you. It's just, how do you feel about carrying the anger going
Yeah.
forward? Like that's really the question we have to look at.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that. I love that you said if you don't feel ready to forgive, you don't force yourself to forgive. It's a very difficult thing to do when so much of your world has been shattered and broken. And there's this expectation in society that for you to move on, you must forgive. And it's also okay to carry the hurt into future relationships. Obviously, you try and work on that, but it's natural because it's a part of your life. You can't just shake off what's happened to you. But I guess being able to identify that.
Yeah, because look, if you went to therapy for infidelity recovery and let's say, the relationship ended, you did some of the work, but the relationship couldn't be saved, unfortunately, that's okay. Going forward in future relationships, just know that that's going to be a vulnerability there. And you'll have to communicate that with your new partner, and your new partner will have to work with you and understand where you're coming from and what's gone on. That's
Yeah,
true
yeah.
too.
And I'm glad we've touched upon that because I think when people think of the word infidelity recovery, um, there's a possibility people think it's the couple fixing things and moving forward together. but there's a chance you may not fix things. You may not even want to. Both of you might not want to, but the recovery is in your self recovery as well.
For sure, because, you know, even if the relationship doesn't work out, think about it, you know, we still have to do the work in order to, you know, support ourselves and hopefully not repeating past patterns, because that's unfortunately what happens. We can't just quote move on. We can only move forward and move on if we've actually done some of the internal processing of why this happened, the anger associated with it, you know, understanding the previous patterns and not hopefully not repeating those patterns. Because even, you know, I have a couple I'm working right now, you know, there's been affairs and infidelity and dishonesty there, and they're not able to come together. They're just not. So right now we're working on how can you guys be healthy co-parents and at least like maybe be friends. Like can at least a friendship, you know, be a possibility. So the outcome can be different for every couple.
Yeah, and co-parenting is a massive thing because there's so much detriment that can spill over to the children,
Sure.
because of the animosity between partners and just everything. So I think it's so important to be able to come to a place, and I can't advocate for therapy enough. And it's really refreshing to speak to another therapist actually,
Yes.
because there's that understanding.
Sure.
So what would you say to anyone that's sort of kind of just Googling or trying to find out what's infidelity recovery all about, and I don't know if it's for me, and you know, maybe it won't work. What would you say to anyone that's 1 foot in a little bit?
Yeah, you know, first of all, of course, do your research. So, you know, if you're somebody that likes to Google and learn more about it, definitely do your research and, you know, seek somebody out that has experience in doing this type of work because it is so specialized. I don't know that every therapist, you know, that doesn't has this experience can be supportive in what you're needing. So certainly do your research. And you know, if you're questioning if this is really for me, I think really asking yourself, well, why am I questioning? Why am I doing this research? Has there been some sort of a betrayal, or am I thinking about an affair? You know, that can also be an important question too. um, I certainly recommend moving forward because, you know, you shouldn't have to necessarily work through this on your own. It can be really challenging, and you want like an unbiased, you know, second or third party to support you. So yeah, feel free to do your research. There are also, you know, really wonderful books out there too. Like if you're wanting to understand a little bit more about betrayal and the trauma associated with betrayal or why affairs happen, like there are also really wonderful books out there, so you can certainly do your research too.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So anything else that you would like to say, because we're coming towards the end?
Yeah, you know, there's no shame in going to therapy. I hope, you know, me sharing about my own experiences has been helpful, and you know, your pain is not too much for a therapist. You know, I'm just like you were saying, you know, like very big advocate of it, of course. So please seek out the support. You don't have to do it alone, and it's out there.
Yeah, and like you said, the pain is not too much for a therapist. We go through this together. It's a journey. We embark on it together.
Yes.
And you know, we feel it. We feel the relation. It's a relationship. We feel the pain. We go through it with you. We understand it. And so, where can people find you? What are your social media sites? Your podcast site?
Yeah. So I'm on Instagram at Therapy with Janet B. You can find me there. Again, I'm based out of Los Angeles, California. My website is roadtowellness.co if you want to learn a little bit more about my work and what I specialize in. And then we have a podcast called Couch Time Podcast. I co-host it with my colleague, another marriage and family therapist, Susie Halajian. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all of those channels. And in our podcast, we also try to help break the stigma on mental health. We also talk about what it's like to, you know, be a business owner in the mental health field. So a lot of that great stuff.
I have listened to the podcast, and it's amazing. And whoever's out there, go and listen to it. They cover so much on there, and it's so enriching that when I listened, I needed to reach out to you and just have this conversation. So yeah, I love the
Awesome.
stuff you're doing.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
You're welcome. So thank you for joining me.